Hi, and welcome to this week's Author Spotlight. I'm Rebecca Ford, and this is EABooks. And today we have a children's author with us. Children's authors are always my favorite to have on the show. And Patricia, we are so glad that you are joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Great. Nice sunny Saturday morning.
I know I see it streaming in your window. So that is awesome that I have a bright sunny day too. But I want to get right back to your books because you are a prolific author. You have how many books now?
I have 3 that are published, and the 4th one is hopefully going to be out in March or April.
Yes, and then I know that you have a lot more stories inside of you.
Oh,
I
yes.
love for you just to show us a sample of your books and let us see the covers. The artwork is amazing, and the stories are adorable. So let's take some time and spotlight those books for you. Why don't you tell us about them?
Okay. This is my first book, and this one is a little mouse wanders into a church and he learns what happens there. He learns about prayer, the Bible, and everything that happens in a church because he's never been in a church before. So that is the first book. The second book is the Christmas story. And there again, he wakes up, he's fallen asleep, he wakes up as the children are doing the Christmas pageant. So he learns the true meaning of Christmas there again in his sparkling little eyes. And then the third book, and I waited several years to write the Easter story because I just didn't feel it was time. But I wrote the Easter story, and this tells the true Easter story of Palm Sunday and of Jesus dying on the cross for us in the eyes of the little mouse again. So it teaches children all of that.
So Patricia, why a mouse?
I really can't tell you. This idea just kept going around in my head. And I don't know why it was a mouse. I really can't tell you that. This is years ago, like 20 years ago. So we got a new pastor at our church. And I told him, I said, I have this idea about children's books, and it's a little mouse. And he said, what have you written? So I showed him, which wasn't a lot. So he said, how about if you write for our church newsletter? So I wrote for the church newsletter in secret for several years. I think it was like 8, 9 years, and no one knew it was me. But I would send my articles to him and he would critique them and make sure that everything was okay. And then he would send them on to the church news secretary, and she would publish them then and put them in the church newsletter once a month. So I had a lot of practice, but I loved it.
So you had this idea 20 years ago,
Uh-huh.
and you never moved forward with your Mary Mouse series until basically a couple of years ago.
Well, the first book was 2015. I
Okay.
published the first 2 in 2015.
Okay.
And
So my question is, because I always wonder this for authors, do you feel like that the series would be the same if you had written it 10 years ago and what it is now? Do you think the timing of writing makes a difference in a writer's life?
yes, I really believe that in the life of the books. I mean, what you're wanting to talk about, because these are all the foundation. As I say, the Christmas story and the Easter story, those are the foundation of a children's walk with God and learning about Jesus. And it's because it's a little mouse.
Mhm.
It's from his eyes. And I think that's there again, it's the wonder of a little child when they see something. And this little mouse has that wonder that he sees, in learning.
Mhm. So again, if you had written it 10 years ago, do you think that the plot would have changed? Do you think how do you know when it's the time to write your story?
You know, uh, right now, the one that I have written on grief and loss, I worked with my grandson, who is a pastor in Ohio. We've gone back and forth for months writing this book. And with COVID and the things that children have experienced, I felt this was the time to write that. Where the other ones, this is a foundation. Now we're getting more into what it means to be a Christian and your faith, and that there is hope in Jesus, no matter what happens to you. So 10 years ago, I wouldn't have written that.
Wow. Isn't that amazing? Um, I love the fact that you write children's books. As I said, children's books are some of my favorite because and I love children's authors because they're so full of life. I want to switch now to the publishing side of being an author. You decided to go with EABooks, which is a hybrid publisher. What made you make that decision?
I went to St. David Christian Writers Conference for 5 years at Grove City College, Pennsylvania. I'm from Pennsylvania. I moved to South Carolina 6 years ago, but I went to that conference at St. David's for 5 years. And the last year I went, Sherry was there and I met her there. I took her course, and I knew that when the time came that I was ready to publish, she was the person that I would contact.
So
Pardon
is
me?
it hard putting your baby in the hands of somebody else?
No, because I felt that she, with her background and what I learned from her that day at the conference, I felt that I was putting them in good hands, if you know what I mean. I knew that she would, what would the word be? Bring them to life for the child. And it would be something that she would help me along that journey also, because it's a big step.
Mhm. So with your books, you obviously, it's a children's books, it's going to have illustrations. How
Yes.
do you go about finding an illustrator?
Sherry found that in EABooks. They found the illustrator, and Dave O'Connell. They had a lady that did them, but then they had Dave O'Connell has done did my Easter book, and then we revised the first two books. My grandson and his wife actually had made a gift to me of having him revise my book 1 and 2. I loved what the other illustrator did, but I also loved what Dave did. So we have Dave, and he is phenomenal. He's a Christian man, and it is so exciting when I write a book to see my words come to life with his illustrations. I think that's so exciting for me, just as an author.
And I have to say, Mary, that why did I call you Mary? Because it's Mary Mouse.
Yes.
Trisha.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know also because you are a whiz at marketing. And I would love for you just to take a little bit of time and talk to our authors, because I will tell you that the number one question that we get at EABooks after the books are published and during that process is, how do I market my book? You have been very successful at it. So I would love for you to take this time and tell us a little bit about your marketing strategy.
First of all, before I leave the house in the morning, if I am going out to, I call it cold call on people, or go to an appointment that I have already set, I pray that God will lead me to someone who I am to speak to and who I need to hear them speak to me. And so I feel that God is with me. And so I go to churches and to businesses also to see who might be interested in my books. But I do go to a church. Sometimes I just go in and talk to the person and tell them that I have books, children's books, or I have been in a church, one church in particular, and the lady said, I work here, but I would like you to call my church. And so she went on the computer and pulled up all the information and gave it to me. I called her church, and they were so open. They invited me. I spoke in front of 80 or 90 children, read my book to them right after their Christmas program. So I go to businesses, as I say. I tell them, about my books. And I always ask them, is there something, are my books something that you would be interested in? Because I can get too excited about my books also. So I have to remember that I have to listen to them and see what their needs are. I'm invited to speak in front of senior citizens, 60 and older. They have a meeting once a month. And so now I'm asking churches if they have that type of a group in their church that they would like me to come and speak in front of them and tell them my journey. And I've had great response from that also. And even my home church asked me to come and told me to, how about if you put up your little table in the narthex, and we'll announce that you're here. Also, I had my Easter book dedicated at my church.
Oh, wow.
Yes, I asked them. I said, and they said, we have never done that. But no, I think that is a great idea. So they actually had me come up and dedicated the Easter book when it came out. They dedicated it at the church. So that was really a special, special day for me and for Mary Mouse.
Yeah, I think of all the interviews I've ever had, I don't think anyone has ever told me that their book has been dedicated at their church. That is amazing.
Uh,
So with that, every author hopes that their books reach an audience. What have you found to be the biggest blessing from your book being published and being able to reach people?
my own blessing,
Mhm.
what I just to be able to share these books. When I started to write, I found a prayer that I had written before I ever, well, right when I first contacted Sherry and EABooks. And it said that I prayed that all the words in the books were God's words and for his glory, not mine. And so I always tried to think about that. And I do. I mean, these are for his glory and for his children. And the blessing is when someone buys a book, whether it's a grandparent or a parent, I've had people buy them and put in the, what is it called? The shoebox ministry.
Oh, yes.
Yes, I've had them buy them and put them in there. And it's, I don't know who's going to be touched, but I always pray, even I said, even if one child is touched, to me, that's worth writing the books. And that is such a blessing just to know that a child could be touched. And I pray that they are.
So
That
do you ever hear back from any of the children? Do you have a fan club, Pat?
I don't, but when I spoke I spoke in front of or read my book at Christmas time between, I just got a thank you note from the director. That's the first time I have ever received a thank you note, but she thanked me for coming and said how much they enjoy the book, the Christmas. It was a Christmas book that I read to them, and how much they are enjoying it. And they purchased 20 books to give to their 4-year-olds that were graduating from that preschool. So, but what a joy! I mean, and to get that little note, I mean, and there again, it's not about me, but yet it's nice to have someone say thank you.
Well, right. I think it's always awesome when we acknowledge other people's gifts and maybe how they've touched us.
Yeah,
So I'm glad that you got that thank you note.
yeah.
For our listeners out there, I would love for you to, well, first of all, tell us how to get a hold of you and to also maybe pass on a word of advice that you would give to anyone who is questioning if they should write a book or they're in the middle of the process of getting it published. What wisdom would you pass on to them?
First of all, I would say that go for it. I have people all the time asking me how I went about publishing my books. And I told them about St. David's Writers Conference. And of course, EABooks. I always give them the information about EABooks. And I said, call them. And I said, go for it. Because if you don't try, you don't know what God has in store for you. I've always said I don't know what God has in store for me the rest of my life. I don't know, what plan he has, because in Jeremiah it says he has a plan for our life, right? So I just don't know. And so I tell them, go for it. Call EABooks. They will guide you the whole way through the process. So that's my big advice. And I have to tell you one thing. My granddaughter is 40 years old. And when she was born and she started to talk, she called me Grandma Sweetheart. And my husband is Papa Hunt. So I always have to tell people that. And when I go and I introduce myself, whether it's a church or a business, I always tell them I'm Pat Galbreath, and I'm an author. I write these books. And then after I've talked to them a little while, I said, I'm also known as Grandma Sweetheart. And I pass that on to the people too.
Well, we are going to wrap up today, Pat. And how do we get a hold of you? Do you have a website?
I have a website. Yes, it's called Mary, Merry, churchmouse.com. Or you can always call me on the telephone too, 864-920-8237.
Well, I hope that you get a lot of response And I love the fact that your children's book is a series. I think that kids, that's important for kids
Mhm.
because they love following the character throughout and they love the idea of a series. So, Pat, we just thank you so much for joining us today. And all of you listening today, I hope, and watching, I hope that you have a great day. And again, Pat, thank you for joining us on EA Book Spotlight.
And thank you for having me.